So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for your interest in today's webinar. This is the 10th webinar that TTI has put on since September of 2012. The aim of these biweekly webinars is to allow us to easily engage and share with presenters and with each other on a range of topics. We had three formats for these webinars. The first is practically driven, which is the format that we've had for the majority of our webinars. These included presentations on Google Analytics, search engine optimization, Google applications, and accessing data through the Think Tank Initiative database. Second format is topic-driven, which provides a space for more spontaneous discussion amongst many participants on a particular topic. This was actually our format for our webinars, where we had a discussion on what a post-MDG development agenda might look like. And the final format for our webinar is author or guest speaker-driven, which is the format for today's webinar, as Tricia Wynn leads us through the evaluation of outcomes. So, Tricia, who is now sitting right beside me, is a Senior Program Specialist with IDRC's Corporate Strategy and Evaluation Division. And this is the division at IDRC leading IDRC in developing and tracking its organizational level strategy. Oversees IDRC's evaluation system that supports the Center's accountability and learning needs. It manages center-wide evaluations and supports IDRC programs in using evaluation for their own purposes. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Tricia.
Thanks very much. And, sorry for the delay in getting started, but I'm hoping that everyone can hear me now that I'm sitting here beside the woman who has the conch. And I'm going to just wait for a second while Sarah hopefully gets the slides up on her computer now. So people are now able to see the presentation? All right. Okay, well, good morning all. And for those of you in very different time zones, good afternoon and good evening. It's quite a nice thing to be involved in one of these TTI webinars. And I noticed that a lot of your evaluations or a lot of your webinars have had an evaluative focus that look at analytics to track reach and outcomes of your work, as well as the more recent one by CGD about tracking organizational influence. The webinar that I'm going to be doing today has two rather distinct parts. The first is about evaluating at the level of different types of results, and in this case, a focus on outcomes. And then I'd like to share a specific example of an evaluation of policy influence outcomes that IDRC and one of our grantee organizations commissioned quite recently. So I just thought I'd start out with being an evaluation, and I'm just going to see here that the slides are coming up. There we go. So, yeah, I did notice that you have quite an evaluative focus in your webinars, and I'm in evaluation. I've been working in the evaluation section of IDRC for about 5 years now. And there's a lot of reasons why I like evaluation. The first is that evaluation is all about results. And results tends to be the things that we most care about and why we come to work in the morning. Hopefully we enjoy the process of our work, and I'll bet that we all have marvelous colleagues, but really it's about results. Evaluation helps us improve. And whether that's by reading evaluations of other people's work or having evaluations done of our own work, we get a lot of really useful feedback and reflections on experience that helps us do better in the future. Evaluation supports clear communication because when we're doing evaluations, we have to be very clear about what we contribute and why that matters. Finally, in the IDRC anyway, evaluation is built on a set of principles that are outlined in our evaluation strategy. And these principles remind us what high-quality evaluation should look like, and I think keep evaluation grounded in what IDRC as an organization helps or wishes to achieve. And that's something where evaluation can keep and in fact reinforce the culture and values of an organization. So I'll just mention two of the principles, and there are others. One is that evaluation should give voice to different perspectives on what constitutes success, because it's important for us to hear different perspectives about what is valuable and what is useful. A second principle is that evaluation should not be extractive or just disempowering exercise to those who are being evaluated, but it should actually build the capacity of those whose work is being evaluated. And so, in that sense, evaluation should be in and of itself a capacity-building intervention. And it should be part of the evidence base for good development. So evaluation pushes us to be clear on results. But there are a lot of results that we could talk about. Typical results chains go from outputs to outcomes, And finally, on to impacts. Often, monitoring and reporting focuses on activities and outputs. And those are very useful things to keep track of to ensure that we're making progress and to ensure that our work is of high quality. Now, other people would put the focus of evaluation firmly on impacts, because what really matters is whether people's health is better, whether communities are better off economically, whether the environment is improved, or other changes in state or improved well-being that we ultimately want to aim for. But IDRC spends a lot of its evaluation efforts on the level of outcomes. And that's because while we recognize that outputs are useful, they typically can't create themselves change. On the other hand, while we are passionately concerned about impact, and a lot of the research that we support are in fact impact studies of different interventions or policies, we don't do as much impact evaluation of our programming. For research for development, impact evaluations would have to assess, for instance, the contribution of research to a change in policy, which in turn contributes to changes in human health. So that creates a very long results chain that has to take into account a multitude of other actors and factors and important aspects of context. It can be fairly expensive to do a good impact evaluation, and you don't necessarily get the kind of information and feedback from an impact evaluation that you need in the shorter term to improve performance. So everybody has to make choices in how they use limited resources, and in evaluation, given that those evaluation resources are also limited, we're judicious about when we would undertake an impact evaluation. So while other levels of results are very important, many IDRC commissioned evaluations do focus on outcomes. Typical outcomes that we look at are research-based evidence, how it informs changes in practice, or changes in policy, influence technological development, or increases capacity. The thinking is that outcomes are close enough for you to influence, they can occur quickly enough to feed back into your strategy, they're a space where you want to make change, and they can demonstrate whether or not we're on track for the bigger impacts that we're actually aiming for. So you can think of these level of results as being in your sphere of control, your sphere of influence, and your sphere of interest. Activities and outputs are those things in your sphere of control, largely. Impacts are things that you are definitely interested in, and outcomes are in that space where you can influence change. That sphere of influence is not necessarily a comfortable space, though, when it comes to evaluation, where we feel evaluation has to give us very clear evidence of our accountability. It's a space in which projects and organizations can't control change. So perhaps it's worth spending a few moments on why some IDRC grantees and programs have found it useful to focus on outcomes. Some grantees that I've talked with talk about how thinking about the outcomes have helped scientists and researchers shift their focus from the study that they're doing as the end in itself to what the study is intended to contribute to. There's an example from a project in Uganda that investigates disease transmission between wild animals, livestock, and humans. A researcher in that project described how his team was initially strongly oriented to producing academic publications. However, in this applied research project, they actually wanted to influence the practice of veterinarians, of pastoralists, as well as decision makers. When they started thinking about the outcomes of their research, being those changes in practice and policy, they realized that they didn't have strategies really in place yet to effectively reach those groups. And they realized that it was not just going to be a case of having popularly written outputs. They really needed strategies to pave the way for influence throughout their research. So they shifted course. They engaged pastoralists, for example, in meetings about the research and got their input into their priorities. And they even had pastoralists carry out particular research activities, including drawing blood for their own cattle for serology studies, which was something that had been fairly contentious previously when the researchers had wanted to go out and draw blood from the cattle. When the pastoralists did it, it demonstrated that they actually had a high level of trust in the project and buy-in for what the project was trying to accomplish. So the lead researcher explained how the focus on outcomes prompted his colleagues to think as rigorously about their strategies for influence as they did to the rigor of their research methodology. The shift in outcome thinking, though, is not just among grantee organizations. It's also internal within IDRC. And it's embedded in a shift that we've had over the last number of years in our own program planning and evaluation. In the past, programs planned and created a 60-page document that outlined what research they were going to be pursuing on what types of themes and provided a couple of very broad outcomes of what they might want to accomplish. Then we had evaluators come in for the end of the 5-year period, and those evaluators spent quite a lot of time just trying to understand and then assess what the program had accomplished. The way one program leader recently described the old system was, as she put it, we had a program document that described what we were going to do. And then we put all our documentation into a wheelbarrow and wheeled it over to our external evaluators and asked them to please let us know what we accomplished. So she's someone who appreciates the newer system of outcome-oriented planning and evaluation. Current program plans now outline what outcomes the program seeks to achieve and through what strategies. And then at the end of the 5-year period, the program does a self-assessment about how it implemented its strategy and what outcomes it thinks it achieved. Then evaluators are tasked with a much more targeted job of collecting data to verify the outcomes. The program leader described the shift as helping her team move the story from what we do to what we accomplish. Now, there are a lot of other challenges in focusing on outcomes. When you're in that sphere of influence, you need to understand your contribution among many other influences, some of which are moving in the same direction as your influence, some of which are moving counter. And it's important to tease out what the contribution that you have made toward the change that you're seeing. And you need to therefore have probes outside your sphere of control to let you know what kind of influence you're having. There could be a lot more to say about pros and cons of focusing on different levels of results. But I also wanted to share with you today an example of a recent evaluation that was commissioned on the policy research or the policy influence of a research organization. It's an evaluation of Learn Asia, which is an organization based in Sri Lanka. Learn Asia does research on information and communication technologies, and particularly how poor people access and use mobile phones and the Internet. What policy mechanisms and regulations, including taxation issues in those sectors, are most beneficial to poor people. The reason that Learn Asia and IDRC commissioned this evaluation of policy influence was because they felt that Learn Asia was particularly strong at doing this, at positioning their research and making connections with policy. So they did an evaluation so that we could document and learn from their experience. The process of this evaluation started with surfacing the organization's theory of change. A theory of change is an explanation of how you understand change happens. Basically, it describes how your intervention is supposed to work. In this case, it's a theory of change of how Learn Asia's research influences policy. The theory of change set out what the overall goal of Learn Asia is, and you'll see it there at the top of the screen. And then what preconditions needed to be in place to realize that goal. What strategies are needed for those preconditions to come about. This was very much based on internal discussions within Learn Asia and also from IDRC's external observation of how Learn Asia operated. So this was something that was surfaced through a series of interviews at the beginning of the evaluation and document review to try to make explicit what was this otherwise implicit theory of change within the organization. So here's a diagram of their theory of change. You'll notice here that this is not an orderly results chain in tidy separate columns that take us from activities to outputs to outcomes and impacts. The evaluation takes pains to understand the complexity of research to policy processes. The ultimate aim of Learn Asia is there at the top. Basically, that ICTs improve the lives of the poor. The preconditions build from the bottom up. It starts from Learn Asia producing credible research, and that research reaches targeted audiences. The preconditions go all the way up to precondition H, there, just under their goal, where you see that policies are effectively implemented. You'll see that the theory of change outlines where Learn Asia's sphere of control begins and ends, where its sphere of influence is, and ultimately its sphere of interest. The theory of change further clarifies how Learn Asia's strategies contributed to those preconditions. Now, in this slide, I'm not expecting that you'd be able to read the green or the gray text where all the strategies are vis-a-vis the different preconditions, but just to show you that there are strategies all the way up. And I'll take a moment here to blow up two different sections of this theory of change to give you a flavor of what it looked like in detail. So here are the strategies that supported precondition C. That new knowledge, ideas, and proposed solutions targeted by Learn Asia reach target audiences. And you can see there that they had a number of different strategies that would contribute to ensuring their research got to the people that they wanted to get to. Here, moving up the theory of change toward the level of outcomes, is precondition D, where LearnAsia contributions are perceived as authoritative, useful, and timely. And you'll see that out of the underlying preconditions, that again, LearnAsia had a number of strategies to try to get their contributions perceived that way. In the evaluation, each precondition was laid out with a set of outcomes that could be assessed then to determine whether, for specific cases of intended policy influence, did that precondition exist or not. So here's that precondition D, where outcomes related to the supply side. Targeted actors' knowledge and understanding of LearnAsia's research and their perceptions of its authority, usefulness, and timeliness is the general category of outcomes that evaluators were looking for in different case studies. And the details there are kind of like the indicators of what the evaluators were looking for as they set out doing particular studies then on where LearnAsia had done research and was attempting to influence policy. So going back to the theory of change, the evaluation now had a testable hypothesis of how change comes about, and they focused very much on that middle level of outcomes, of policy influence outcomes. The evidence that they gathered was based on interviews with relevant actors who could speak to the context, the outcomes, and LearnAsia's contribution. And the evaluation then looked at 5 specific cases in which LearnAsia had felt that it had quite different levels of success in influencing policy. I'm going to show you 2 visuals that show how the evaluators mapped evidence that they collected onto their standard theory of change in 2 different cases. Again, this is something that I'd be more than happy to share with you the link to this evaluation where you can look at it in more detail, but I think the visual is something that we can even just look at in a general sense. In one of the case studies, the evaluation showed that LearnAsia could consider itself successful in directly influencing policy. The yellow boxes that are superimposed on this version of the theory of change shows critical success factors that were in place and how those linked up with the preconditions in the theory of change. You'll see how the success factors were evident all the way up the levels of preconditions. But in another case study, LearnAsia did not achieve the influence that it had hoped for. The yellow boxes still denote critical success factors, but the orange boxes show impediments to success. And you'll see again where the impediments were also at different levels of things that LearnAsia could perhaps control, things that were ultimately in its sphere of influence, and strategies that just didn't work. The LearnAsia evaluation has been really quite helpful, not only in providing evidence of outcomes, but also in probing reasons for success or failure, and what organizational strategies were important or not in influencing change. It's been very helpful for both LearnAsia and IDRC for all the reasons why we like evaluations. It helps us be clear on results, it helps us improve, and it helps clarify our communications about why we do what we do, what we achieve, and why that matters. So I want to turn it over to you, and I wonder very much what resonates with your experience of this type of work. What's your experience of evaluation? What's your experience of focusing on outcomes, or any other comments or questions that you would have to me? So I'm going to make sure that Sarah is here to open up the floor for discussion, because I'm not quite sure how to do that.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Okay, great. As Tricia said, we're now inviting comments, questions from the participants.
Sarah, if I may, this is Antonio here.
Okay, just a second. I need to pass the headphones over to Tricia. It's a little awkward here that we're sharing one account and one set of headphones. So forgive me. I just want to, before you ask the question, I just want to make sure that she actually hears the question.
Great.
Very sorry. Please do go ahead.
Thank you, Tricia. Antonio here. Very interesting presentation. I was just wondering, this comes really from my experience and from what grantees are currently about here in Latin America. It's really about the process of implementing a system that actually allows the institutions to monitor and evaluate what they do, and there seem to be some challenges at the beginning in terms of ownership of the process beyond the directors. So I was wondering if you could share something along the lines of going about establishing a monitoring system in an organization that has operated for a number of years, and for the first time they want to create such a system.
Sure. I wonder if it's we could maybe gather up 2 or 3 different comments or questions, and that would help me in collecting my thoughts as well. Is there anyone else? Well, no worries. And yeah, thanks, Antonio. I hear you on challenges of starting something for the first time and figuring out what are the incentives for an organization to set up a broadly owned monitoring and evaluation system. And I think that it boils down to utility. That I have seen people motivated to contribute, take the time that it requires to document outcomes or provide information to a monitoring system when they get something useful out of it. And I think that's something where organizations who figure out what are the different uses that they could design their M&E system for, and to ensure that the uses feed back to the different levels of the organization, not only kind of sucking information up and out, but really thinking about what are the internal uses that would motivate us to take the time to document and reflect on our own progress. And when we develop systems that feed back into multiple levels of use internally to an organization, that also can help pave the way for buy-in all the way up the levels. Because a useful M&E system probably draws information from many different sources. And so teasing apart the different users of the system and what their uses particularly are, honing that system directly to those uses instead of unfortunately, what can happen is that you can create an M&E system that has beauty, elegance, and rigor, but frankly is a huge data dump. And the struggle is always to figure out what's useful of this information, to be parsimonious about the information that we're collecting, and have it only targeted to very specific uses. Those uses will probably include reporting to external stakeholders for accountability reasons and others. But the extent to which it can also drive internal learning processes and be useful for reflection, I think that's really where I've seen organizations get more excited about it and see how it really does let them be more strategic in what they're doing and give them that kind of feedback that they're looking for about whether what they're doing is effective or not effective.
Thank you, Tisha.
Is there anyone else?
Tracy and John O'Kinney here.
Hello, John.
Yes, hi. I'm trying to construct a fairly general question with respect to the TTI, a program where in the beginning there was greater emphasis on achieving intermediate outcomes, which are not in the outcome segment of your Venn diagram, but basically in the output side. Then over time, we have increasingly started paying attention to what you refer to as outcomes in the sphere of influence that we outside our control, but we can influence. In such a context where the focus of the strategy to eventually assess ourselves has shifted a little bit. In your experience, what are some of the challenges and the difficulties that would need to be looked out for, and from your perspective or experience, what would you think could be some of the issues we need to be dealing with? Because, yeah, the implementation strategy of the TTI in the beginning was really focused on the intermediate outcomes, which were basically institutional strengthening. And of course, in the hope that in the long run, these institutions having been strengthened can more effectively impact policy that can change the well-being of the citizens of the respective countries in which the TTI is operating. It's not a very clear-cut question, but I hope you probably got a sense of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it seems to me that part of that is that as you go on, it can be that your outcomes become outputs, and you move along that your theory of change. I think one of the challenges about moving to outcomes, now that you're talking about more the influence of organizations as opposed to the internal strength of an organization, is that you are moving your probe past your direct, for TTI, your direct boundary partners, and you're moving it to the boundary partner of your boundary partners. So for TTI, the program, you have moved your level of evidence out a step. And that requires different collection methods of data and different analytical frames to understand what influence that capacity building has had or what that strength of organization is now able to achieve. I have one thought about the challenges of moving that just arose from an article that I was reading recently on outcomes in nonprofits. And one of the challenges that this article was talking about was that sometimes when we put together our results framework, we start still with the activities that we're doing, the outputs that will be produced because of those activities, and then from there we look for indicators of those outputs in use. And so that creates sort of the activity-driven line of results conception. But when evaluators talk to the frontline staff of organizations and they say, well, what really matters in the results that you're achieving, they didn't start with the activities and worked on out. They talked about in their case, the beneficiary clientele that they were working with, the outcomes that they wanted to achieve, and the way the focus was much more on getting to know their beneficiaries and then adjusting all of their programs and strategies to meet the needs of the beneficiaries and support outcomes there. And there was a mismatch between the outcomes that frontline staff were trying to achieve versus what was conceptualized when you started with the activities. So this is one example. Nonprofits, a lot of them do training, and then the outcomes are looking at to what degree beneficiaries were using the skills that they developed in the training. But when you talk to frontline staff, they weren't so necessarily interested in contributing it back to the program that they did. They were much more interested in resilience and well-being of their beneficiaries, whether or not those were connected to the particular trainings or not. The trainings became much more instrumental as opposed to the way toward results. So I hope that wasn't too convoluted, but that's, I think, one of the challenges of moving along results chains is sometimes you have to stop and figure out, if I would just take the pulse now, are the way that we articulated our results to begin with, are those really the results that we want to see when we're at this level of outcomes? Or should we reconceptualize what we're looking for as evidence of change? Do we need to tweak it a bit, or do we need to, in fact, shift our focus because we're no longer at the same starting point that we were before? So that's one thing to start to look for. I think the other part about when you are moving to your boundary partners, is that maybe now the focus is much more on strengthening grantees' own M&E systems because they're the ones who can have the more direct probes amongst their boundary partners than you can as TTI. That's a hypothesis. I'm not really sure whether that's true in all of your sectors, but that may be the case, that now you need to really look at what's the outcome orientation of your grantees and how can you support that such that it influences both their own internal learning processes and can feed back into what TTI seeks to understand about the whole program focus.
Can I just come in? I don't see anyone else's hands up. Oh, Suresh's hands is up, so let me just step back and maybe Suresh, you can ask the question. Sorry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Hello.
Hello.
Good.
I'd like to ask a simple question, and maybe I missed something in Trisha's presentation. You located in the Learn Asia example outcomes in the sphere of interest, and that was a little different from what you presented in the earlier slide where you put it in the sphere of influence. Was there a reason for doing that in that area of change?
Let me go back. The evaluation of Learn Asia focused most of its attention in that sphere of influence. You can see that are these slides up on screen? No, okay, sorry. Sarah's going to help me for a second in making sure that the slides are back up on screen. So you'll see that the evidence that the evaluators actually collected was both in that sphere of control at the bottom as well as in that sphere of influence, and only a little bit up into the sphere of interest. The evaluation actually made clear that they weren't going to necessarily do an evaluation of the quality of the research, for instance, as a separate piece in the evaluation to see whether, in fact, it was credible research. Those yellow boxes on the theory of change showed actually much more what were people's perception of the quality of research. So they were still gathering evidence of issues of quality, but from that sphere of influence, as opposed to a hard and fast look at to what degree was the research that Learn Asia was using rigorous and credible and following accepted scientific standards, for instance. So they were definitely interested toward the sphere of interest, but they focused the evaluation much more on that middle level. And I think you can see here, too, that it's the middle level where, in the case where there was a lot of impediments to policy influence, that a lot of the problems came up in that sphere of influence, as well as a few things back in the sphere of control. But they really didn't gather evidence on that high level of the potential of ICTs to contribute to growth and improve the lives of all in the region, particularly the poor. So they didn't map out all of the changes in policy, for instance, that Learn Asia was able to influence, and how that did or didn't affect the lives of the poor. That would be quite a different evaluation, and one that they would have to do more of an impact study on the policy and then trace back into Learn Asia's influence. I may be misunderstanding your question, though. Does that sort of get at it?
No. I think you answered it, but I get the sense that, I mean, we're talking about a fairly fluid situation here, and we're trying to package elements into coffins that are comfortable to us in terms of, input outcomes and so on. But that's all right. I think I get the general drift. I mean, I think that's the never mind. Let me having absorbed that, I just wanted to. This is not a question as much as a comment. You used the word capacity quite frequently, and you said, and to my understanding, I'm from the Public Affairs Center, Bangalore. We use a lot of interactive tools such as citizen report cards. Okay, the ownership of the understanding of outcomes among those being evaluated is as important as ownership within. Therefore, capacities without our evaluation system are as important as capacities within. Otherwise, our entire evaluation process is not bought as the evaluation proceeds. See, a lot of your discussions seem to focus on how we change internally and refocus strategies as we go along and remove impediments. But it's equally important that capacities outside are sensitized and move along with us as the evaluation proceeds.
Yes, definitely. On two things, perhaps, is that life is extremely messy, and it's true that any theory of change is trying to simplify as a helpful thinking device or clarifying device a very messy reality. The evaluator who did this work for Learn Asia recognized that putting anything down onto one piece of paper was never going to adequately address the complexity of what was going on. And her attempt at using squiggly lines instead of standard arrows was merely an attempt to say, this is not a linear process, but for the sake of trying to be clear about pieces of it, maybe we can map it out. And I agree that any time that we try to boil things down to outputs outcomes and impacts. Things are very fluid. They move back and forth. Arrows should go in multiple directions. And when we are creating a theory of change together, sometimes we will map out things that look much more messy, and the process of doing so can be very clarifying. But when you're trying to communicate to other people and show them the wicked systems diagram that you just produced, it can be more bamboozling than it can be helpful. So this was a way to try to honor some of the complexity in the situation, but still be helpful in communicating something that was a bit more straightforward. But I take your point that sometimes we do try to reduce things into tidy categories that are maybe we think are helpful, but perhaps are not. I'd like to hear more about the capacities outside versus inside, because I think I'm catching some of what you're saying, but I'd like to hear a bit more.
Right. With citizen report cards, for example, we are already working. We are already working with those people in the governance structure who want to know about the results as they come out, right? We are looking at citizen perceptions of public service delivery, and we already have to sensitize those who want to know the results in advance to the kinds of feedback that citizens are likely to give them, so that they can already start tweaking their delivery system. Inevitably, evaluations come a little later than they should, especially in government systems. We are called in almost at the end of the whole process, when there's very little time to reorganize matters and so on. Very often there isn't even another phase to follow, or nothing guaranteed. So during the remainder of this it's in this little window period when your evaluation is going on that the change agent wants to make things happen. Therefore, that change agent has to be sensitized to your research approach and the findings as they come up from time to time. Therefore, that person or set of persons has to have the capacity to receive what you're saying. So if you load them with a huge theory of change of this variety, it might confuse them, it might even disturb them. Because they're looking for simple things to do, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I think it's important that evaluators be judicious too, and when they trot these things out, and at what point, because certainly when I hear myself as being the target of influence, that immediately puts my back up a bit. But frankly, the process that you described would suggest that already it has been a collaborative approach to shaping research and shaping the kinds of capacities that will allow both the researchers to produce useful research as well as those who are going to be using it to be able to absorb what it produces and figure out how to use that to improve their performance as government officials. So I agree that a lot needs to be considered when thinking about the timing of evaluations and figuring out what's the most useful way of framing evaluation questions and bringing informants and collaborators in research alongside as you're doing evaluations. There could be a moment that it actually would be very helpful to lay out a whole policy sphere and figure out where research comes in and have decision makers plot where they see research most usefully contributing and to what degree that happened in any particular intervention. So in some cases, these systems diagrams can be quite helpful in an evaluation discussion. But I think it's generally important to walk people through them as opposed to just sit it down in front of them and point, you are here, kind of thing.
Thank you.
Sorry, Hans, hello.
Hello. I was wondering about what your experiences have been in how something like that is being put together in the beginning. Is this a single person task, or do you need a bigger team? What's the level of expertise? What are the risks of getting things wrong? And how do you keep it flexible? I mean, so that you're not trapped into a framework that you can't change. So I guess there's a really broad question about what advice you have to people that are really implementing that, and what you've seen that are working well, and what the challenges were.
Yeah, this was a theory of change that was developed retrospectively after this organization had been strategically doing their work, but not documenting it in this way, and not surfacing all of the different strategies that they use to be influential and position their research. So this was something that the evaluator was brought in after the organization had been working for a number of years. And through the document review and through a facilitated process, through individual discussions, and then I think also with a group discussion with the organization, put together the theory of change and had to vet it back and forth with the organization to ground it and to truth seek as to, does this actually make sense? And does this adequately capture how you understand your work and your strategies and how you understand your influence taking place? Certainly, lots of organizations or programs try to put together a theory of change at the beginning. And I think what you're saying is really important, that it not then becomes something that you're locked into and that you march through reality trying to influence your theory of change, because your theory of change is merely, the reason that we use the word theory is because it's your best hypothesis at the time. And that will definitely change over time as you look for evidence of whether those preconditions are coming about, whether the strategies seem to be effective or not. And I think what I find quite helpful is when programs map out their original theory of change, and then they find ways of superimposing their the adjustments that they make along the way. Sometimes you can get this just through track changes or having parallel columns in a document as you revamp your strategies and note what your key decision points were and what basis you decided to switch strategies and how you think this is going to work better. And other times people just have different snapshots of their mapped out theory of change on a piece of paper or on a flip chart over time. And it shows how things evolve. Even in log frames, I think you can show this to a great extent. So remember there was a program at IDRC called Climate Change Adaptation in Africa. And they had a log frame that they developed at the very beginning of their program. And the policy influence aspects of that at the beginning of their program were all oriented around research teams reaching out towards policymakers. This is very broadly defined, but it was all looking at what researchers were doing in order to engage decision makers. When they updated their log frame about 2.5 years into their program, they switched you had to read closely, but they really switched the focus of that whole policy influence section to be about engaging some policymakers. So decision makers reaching into research processes, or researchers or decision makers engaging in and asking for policy relevant material. And I think this was really, it showed a shift in their thinking and a shift in the strategies that they were supporting as a program in the projects that they were funding, where there was a whole number of strategies then directed to decision makers and helping increase the capacity of decision makers to use research, to be involved in action research processes. And the shift in their log frame, I think, actually documented a shift in their theory of change on how they were going to be effective in moving research back and forth into decision-making realms and back into applied community-level research.
Thanks. Yeah, that's interesting.
So if there are no further questions, that actually concludes our webinar for today. So I would like to say thank you to everyone for very active participation and a very rich discussion. And a very special thank you to Tricia Wynn for both an informative presentation and for being incredibly adaptable in the face of some very serious technical challenges. So thanks again, everyone, and take care. Have a good morning, afternoon, and evening.
Okay. That's good. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
there, I thought I could manage from there. But I think because I was logging twice, it didn't accept me. So I was actually talking out there at one point when I was trying to invite questions.
Hi, Sarah.
So I could hear you through the door, so I ran in here. But I got that. And mine often doesn't work, so that's why I come in here. Because I've made some mistakes there and it's been unsuccessful. So,
Hi, Sarah. You're still online.
It's an invitation to remind this morning, but I guess that didn't.
Hi, Sarah. Can you hear me?
It was very good. She said we were just talking about it. My sister was over there in her office suffering, couldn't connect. Wedding. Very well. Welcome. And it was interesting. I know. No, not at all. Not at all, yeah. And that's probably the expert. This lady and I actually signed up for a WebEx. And that's not helpful, so I prepared to work with WebEx. Yeah. And here's what it was. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. All of you things very uncomfortable, right? And so it's really hard to troubleshoot it and things go wrong when they go right. Hey, ready? Yeah. Right? Well, everything's set up as painting. It's very glitchy today. Good morning. Oh, yeah. No audio. We just run over here and we did a tandem. The good news is that heat up a little bit. Yes, long time. Invite discussion, but I can't hear you. And I kept thinking, I was mulling as I asked questions. And the questions to me now, I'm going to respond. And that's what I ran out there to try, but yeah. But I was back and forth, trying to do a bit. Actually, get that login twice. She was presenting as me, and I was trying to host over there. So, bit awkward, but I think it's okay. In the face of adversity, you were a superstar. So we thank you for that. Yeah. Thanks, Trish, and I apologize. Again, I think in many ways it's a great platform. I don't even really know what other options are. What else is it? Kind of work. Hang on for a second. So it's the Instagram feed and CPF that? Correct. Yeah, that's the last name. So do I have that? From Public Affairs Center in India. And then Muhammad Akif Iqbal is the other one. I can't actually. It's also here somewhere. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I tried looking at the recording. So it turned out really well. He did amazingly. It was very good for me. I was over there, and over here, and it wasn't a smooth transition. That's what I did at the time.
glad that we were here.